Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for our consultants to join the call. We'll get started as soon as they do. City manager, are you able to contact the consultants and see if they're on their way by any chance?
Yeah, I'm working on that now. They did confirm Wednesday morning, so hopefully they're connecting now, but we're double checking with them and resending the invite.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
There she is.
Hello, Ms. Anderson. Are we expecting Dr. Holt as well?
Yes, she should be on any moment. I thought she was just logging in, so I'll send it. Oh yeah, she's on. Yeah, she's on. So we're good. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. And let me just make sure. Yeah, there we go. So she's connected. Excellent. Okay, looks like we're all assembled here. So I'll go ahead and get us started and call to order the third meeting of the working group to develop a community policing and relations task force. This is third and perhaps our final meeting, but even if it is our final meeting, the process will continue as we will be referring this matter onto the City Council for final approval, and then, of course, the formation of the task force itself. And I will just call us 1 second. Give me 1 moment. I will just call us to order and note that everyone is present. We have the SEJC, Social and Economic Justice Commission Chair Greg Downs and Vice Chair Janelle Gary with us, myself, the Mayor, Vice Mayor McQuaid, Police Chief John Geisberger, City Manager, and our consultants, Dr. Holt and Ms. Anderson. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to the members of the public for joining in with us as well. We do have the minutes posted from our last meeting. Did anyone have any corrections to those minutes, or do those look good to everyone if you've had a chance to see them? And not seeing any hands with corrections, but we can come back to that if there's anything missing or anything incorrect in there. We can get that straightened out later in the meeting. So that was agenda item 1, calling us all to order, and I think we can just start going directly into item 2, which is the draft framework. This final draft framework for this meeting was put together by city staff and the consultants as a result of input from our previous 2 meetings. hopefully you've all had a chance to take a look at it. I want to thank both city staff and the consultants for their input. I think we've come to a very good place with this draft framework. And at this point, I think would be appropriate to open it up for questions. As we usually do in our city meetings, open it up to questions from our panelists here, and before we move to any public comment. So do any of the people on the call, panelists on the call here, have any questions about what the city and the consultants have put together? And it's attached to the meeting. Yes, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I don't per se have any questions. I have quite a few comments. Would you prefer that I hold those until after public comment?
I think so.
That's
that would
fine.
be my preference.
Okay. Just want to be sure I was in the right place.
Okay. And oh yes, Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, no, before even jumping in here in public comments, which I definitely appreciate the contributions, I just want to again, first acknowledge the group for the hard work in trying to put this work together, this task force together. I know we as consultants don't take it lightly, and just appreciate the process, because this process is hard, it's messy, it's sometimes we get lost in the process, but I do just want to acknowledge the progress that's been made. There's some historical work that you're doing as city leaders, and I just want to acknowledge you for your work, but also acknowledge the community, because there is so much that the community has endured, and not just Albany, but obviously around our nation, just reminding us of the why of this work. That really, we want to acknowledge that pain and that harm that has been done from kind of an institutional lens. But also recognize that we appreciate working with you because of your acknowledgement of that as well, and your commitment to this work, which kind of shows in your framework, your real intentionality to do this right. And I just want to acknowledge that, because it's important, I think, for us to say to you publicly, but also that the public really hear, that this work is hard and long, and we just commend you on your intentionality and passion to do the right thing. And sometimes it's not always felt, sometimes it's not always understood, but I do want to just acknowledge that this is historical work for Albany, and we just want to make sure I acknowledge that. So thank you again. Before jumping in, I just wanted to make sure I acknowledge you all for that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. And I also should see if you, Ms. Anderson, or a city manager wanted to say anything else before we jump into public comment about the document, or should we just go ahead into public comment soon?
Yeah, good to go to public comment. Just in terms of walking through the document, we're happy to do that as questions arise. And as a reminder, next steps would be that this working group formulates something to send up to the city council for consideration and perhaps additional work, as well as the opportunity to send more than one option if the group has a few different ideas that they'd like to have the council consider. And also just an appreciation, as Nicole Anderson mentioned, staff has taken quite a few hours this week and the week prior to work with Nicole and Dr. Shelley, and I just really appreciate their guidance and their commitment to the work. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Dr. Holtz.
I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge every one of the community members who sent us your emails. We read every single one of those emails. We read every single one of your comments as we were drafting this document. And I just want to offer, especially from, I always say consultant Nicole and city Nicole, because we're oftentimes dealing with both, but we took a lot of time to go over that. And I thank you because many of those emails were very detailed, very thoughtful, very good feedback for us to incorporate into the document. And so as we start to delve deeper into it today, just know that as we start to do that, it's no disrespect to any work. This is an ongoing process. And so there may be things that we shift, and that's okay. Everything is part of the process, and we have to listen and learn together collectively. But I really want to thank the community members and the city staff who have taken so much time to draft this and put so much into this, considering the hard times and the fact that everyone's busy. But we are not, what you've shown as a community is that you're not too busy to put people first. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. The participation of the community is greatly appreciated and greatly needed and required for this process. And it's kind of all about the participation and the interaction with the community in the city here. Thank you for that, and appreciate your ongoing, and hope you continue your participation through what will be a process that's going to, continue over quite a number of months. Okay. Well, let's go ahead to public comment. I see one attendee has already raised their virtual hand, so please go ahead and raise your hand if you wish to speak. I think everyone is on by computer, but everyone is joined by computer. But if you've joined by the telephone, I think it's *9 to raise your hand as well. And with that, City Clerk, could you please go ahead and call the folks in?
Go ahead, Corey. Corey Dosty.
You seem to be unmuted, Corey, but we can't hear you.
Mayor, maybe we can come back to her after.
Yes, let's come back to them. Go ahead.
Go ahead, either Julie or David.
Right. This is Julie. And so I thought we would be doing sections. So all of my comments have to be about the entire document in 3 minutes. Is that what is that correct? I thought you would be doing
thank you for that. Maybe I haven't thought this out quite enough. So why don't we take preliminary comments now, and we certainly can go through the document, and as we need to stop at certain sections and call for more public comment. This is important. I don't want to cut people off unnecessarily. So did you have perhaps any high level comments before we jump in?
I went through the whole document, and I have notes about them, but I can't compress it into this. I will talk really fast. I'm just wondering.
Okay.
Okay, so I will just start with the first one, I guess, which is the purpose and outcome. I would encourage you to include a fourth bullet that says create an environment in Albany in which community members feel safe calling on and interacting with the police. Because right now your purpose and outcomes is basically, I don't know what the recommendations are, open communication to understand what the police are doing, and then police understanding the community needs, but there doesn't seem to be anything about creating a safe environment. And so that's my first comment. I guess I'll just talk for 3 minutes, and then I don't know how to do this. I just have a lot of notes.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll just say preliminarily, maybe what we'll do is we'll take the first section down to timeline. Will be our first section that we'll take public comments for. Everything down to timeline, not including timeline.
Okay, all right. And then in that case, that's my comment, except that I think that this make recommendations of key action steps for the city council to consider. I think using the word around is, I'm not quite sure why that's being used. And I would replace that with related to community policing and relations, or another term. Around just seems a little bit vague to me. And I also had a question. I was wondering if at some point somebody could tell me how many people are attending, because we can't tell as attendees. And I'm just curious how many people show up for these meetings. That would be great to have that information. Okay, so that's my comments up to timeline. Thank you.
Okay, could you do me a favor, and I know you had another bullet point that you wanted to add to
Yes,
to the charge section or the purpose section?
purpose outcome section.
Okay, could you repeat that again?
Yes, create an environment in Albany in which community members feel safe calling on and interacting with the police.
Safe calling on and interacting with police. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and call the next speaker. And I'm sorry for not realizing that this might take more public comments. So let's take comment down to the section, not including the section starts with timeline. And Corey is muted now.
Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Wonderful. Had to turn my headphones on. Good evening. Thank you all very much. And I super appreciate and want to echo the appreciation of everyone involved. I really do see a lot of the comments incorporated that I've been aware of, that I've made and communicated and read in other public comments. And I think staff and consultants and work group members have done a great job with this, and I'm really happy about it. So that said, I super agree with Julie, and I'm really grateful for breaking this up. I was a little bit worried about not getting to respond to any concerns raised. So thank you for having this be preliminary, and then we'll get to then have another, at least one more public comment. I think that's really helpful and important. I also support Julie's recommendation for purpose and outcomes. I am a little bit confused as to why that's different from the charge. The first three that have existed in this draft, I thought were going to be replaced by the charge when we talked last time. So I don't necessarily object to these purposes and outcomes. My main concern is with the title of the task force, which I don't think we've talked about really. And it's maybe not a huge issue because it's not going to constrain the charge, but it does convey, it sort of sets a tone. And the language of community policing and public relations is not what I would pick. It sounds a lot more about only community policing and about people thinking well of the police, and not necessarily changes of how police interact, just of how they communicate, right? Which I think is also reflected in those first three purpose outcome bullets. So I would recommend looking at that to be something more like policing, public safety, those sorts of things. I don't have a perfect solution, and I'm sure that we would disagree anyway, which is fine. It's all a communal process. But yeah, so I would ask how important the title is. If you've thought about it, why you would choose this title, how tied into the purpose outcomes that is. And yeah, just making sure that also integrated into purpose outcomes, the language of community policing and relations is really big there, versus under the charge, right? We got to some language I really like. Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both for your comments. And I think those were the only two public comments. So let's go ahead and bring it back to this group for comments down, but not including the section timeline. So that would be framework component, framework components, purpose outcomes, and charge of task force being created. Vice Mayor, I know you had some comments. Do you want to kick us off?
Can I just interject 1 second? Are you planning to share your screen? I know that the document was already public, but are you able to share your screen just so people can follow along as well in case they don't have it in front of them?
I'm good.
Okay.
Mayor, actually the city clerk has volunteered to do that, and she'll also make changes as we're going once the work group directs and concurs on a change. So she will be sharing her screen. She's just juggling between the public comment and that task. So should be up momentarily.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Perfect. Great. Okay. Do you want to go ahead and start talking about your points, though, while we wait for that to appear? Or would you prefer to have the document up first, Vice Mayor?
I'm fine. I've got it on my screen and in front of me, so I'm ready to go. Regarding charge, I would like to include the words, hang on, let me just find where I am, where it reads, examine policy and practices that have negatively impacted community policing. I'm sorry, wait, I'm not in the right spot.
I think you are.
Okay, yeah, I think
Yeah,
I am.
you are. I wrote down all yours. So there, right there was examine policies and practices, especially related to, right?
Right, what I want to add is especially those after the word practice, but now I've lost where that is. Right, examine policies and practices, and just adding the words, especially those that have negatively impacted community policing. So it makes it, in my mind, it makes it a little bit broader. It's not only those, but it's focused on those, if that makes sense to everybody.
That sounds very reasonable and a good idea.
Because I think it's important to have a global sense of policies and practices, so we better understand how things work. And so that broadens the scope a little bit. And that is my only comment before we get to timeline.
Okay, great. And looks like the city clerk has gotten now, do you need us to repeat that change for you, city clerk?
Please do.
So it's under charge of task force being created. The first one, examine policies and practices. Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Especially examine policies and practices, especially those which have negatively impacted community policing.
Yeah, so you just add especially those.
Correct.
Okay.
I have to make a personal comment. When the screen is shared, I keep trying to drive and nothing moves, and I get very rattled.
Yeah, we all need to have patience, and with one another too.
I'm moving my mouse and it's not moving.
Okay. And there we go.
Sorry, with the screen share sometimes and the PDF, sometimes the reaction of the cursor is a little slower.
Oh, yes, you're editing a PDF. Yeah, that can be very slow in Acrobat. Mm-hmm.
We can format it after the meeting as well, as long as we get the content.
That's right. Yeah, good point. I want to get to the public, addressing the public comments too, but let's see if anyone else had a comment about this section. SCJC folks.
Yes, I'm kind of, I don't want to jump in, but I'm raising my hand whenever you're ready, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't, I can't see your hand, so just jump right in.
Sure. So I appreciate, I support the Vice Mayor's suggestion. The one word in that same area under charge 1 is, I think, we say those that have negatively impacted community policing. I think what, is closer to what we've been talking about, especially policy and practices that have negatively impacted community members. That to me, that's closer to, what we're asking for information about and asking, for examination of. So I would shift from community policing to impacting community members. And then the second, piece I would make, and I think you just referred to this, would be for us to take up and consider something akin to Julie's suggestion of a 4th charge. In order to reflect the kind of holistic goal that we are creating for this, for this committee. So, since you said you were planning to bring that up, I just wanted to affirm that I think we should discuss that.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sending over what I think Julie said to the city clerk, so she can have that ready. How do people feel about changing community policing to community members?
I don't have a problem with that.
I would agree with that. I think community members sound better than community policing. So that sounds great.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, while we're kind of getting organized, can I just go back a step? I think Julie and possibly Corey on the purpose and outcomes had a good idea to change in the first bullet the word around to regarding. I don't know, regarding community policing and relations. I think maybe that's a better word. I think I do agree with them. I think around is a little vague.
Looks like has consensus on that. I agree.
That seemed like an easy fix.
Yeah.
I have my hand raised. I think I'm in agreement with Corey on the name because we're changing community policing in the paragraphs. So I don't know right now what the name would look like, but I think we need to take in consideration on what we're trying to project out to the members that would consider being a part of this task force or committee or commission, however we want to call it. But so that's my my thought process right now. I continue to think about what we could replace it with and make suggestions, but I think we do need to take consideration on the naming of this committee.
Good.
Okay. Yeah. I think. I'm sorry. I was just going to say that I think if we don't have concrete, if we're not sure of concrete suggestions right now, we certainly can give direction to the consultants and staff for when they bring it back to the council about any changes like that. Vice Mayor, you wanted to say something. And people, by the way, just with the screen, when the screen sharing is happening, you'll either have to raise your blue hand so I can see that you wanted to talk, or just go ahead and shout it out because I'm not able to see everyone in the little screens while the screen sharing is on. So, Vice Mayor, you had something to say?
I think I was pretty much going to say what you said. Let's not think about the name. Maybe at the end of this meeting, we'll have thought of something great, or we could pass it back. But I think I'm not opposed to doing that, but let's not do it right this second.
Okay. And then let's see. Okay. And other comments on the first part of the document?
Wait, did we finish the fourth bullet?
I think I captured what Julie said, but you correct me if I got it wrong. It's over, the text is overlapping because we're in a PDF here. but it's create an environment where members of the public feel safe calling on and interacting with the police.
That implies that there's not that environment now. And while I understand that there's not that environment for the entire community, I want to be sensitive to how a little more sensitive to how we phrase that.
How about ensure instead of create?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I talked over you a little bit. Sorry about that. How about ensure instead of create?
Yeah, I think I like that better.
I think, yeah, it's just the very first word you could change to ensure.
Or enhance? No, I think I like ensure better than enhance.
Okay. I think, have I missed anything, addressing anything from public comment? Or the members of the panel here? So I did have one, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to just contribute one quick thought. I think for the sake of time and effectiveness of your time together with this document, what's been really effective is that several of these kind of smaller edits and things that don't change. I think the context of the work that you have for this task force may be continue to be open to accepting those via email with some of the edits. I do appreciate you all really making sense of this because the vision has to be clear for this task force. But I do want to, just remind the group about, some of the outcomes you want to have today. And keep in mind that you may have another meeting to really do one last look over this to make sure you clean it up. It's solid. But I just want to make that comment because I do worry about nitpicking each individual term, which may not change the overarching vision for this group. And also keep in mind to give respect to the task force that they will really help inform some of this work as well. And so that's where some of the thinking may be more clarified when they actually start to unpack and really help to make sense of some of the things that we may even be wrestling with now. So I didn't want you to miss that thought and contribution.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It seems like we took care of these things pretty easily, and we recognize that the title might need changing, but we're not ready to nitpick about that right now, and we can work on that later. So, but I will try to keep track of us not going into the weeds too much and staying as high level as we can. Thank you for that. I think we're ready then to move on to the next section and see if we, sorry, I was going to say that I did have one comment, which was that the document, it does start out by calling policing, community policing everywhere. And that struck me because although I think I would guess that we'd all support community policing, I thought it might be better, and maybe this is what some of the other commenters were getting at, to be a little bit more generic or general and just talk about policing. Of course, yes, we want community policing, but let's be a little bit more general about it. I'll just throw that out there as a thought, as an idea at this time. I don't want to suggest any particular other changes.
I think your point about generality makes sense. I also think, sometimes, there's the sort of specifics of the community-based policing that originated in the 1970s and refers to a specific set of practices that became more widespread in the 90s to the zeros. And then, so that's one thing people will see when they see community policing. Another set of people will think that we mean, more abstractly responsive to the community. And since that phrase will have understandable different meanings to different groups, I think just going with something more general makes sense.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, if we're good with it, let's move on. And I'm looking to what a good next section would be. How about if we just see if there's any comments about the next three sections: timeline, meeting frequency, and reporting structure. Did anyone have any specific comments about those small sections?
Oh, I have one.
Please.
And this is, I won't say that. I believe it says 3 months. I think it should be up to 3 months for the extension.
Okay.
Okay.
That doesn't seem to be seems to be a fine change.
Nicole Anderson, I'll try to stay out of the weeds a little better.
This is your vision, so I definitely don't want to interfere with it, but I do want to make sure, that you all. Go ahead.
If we've got consensus, that was quick and easy. So any other comments about these three sections? I do see we have one attendee comment there. So, but any other comments from the group here before we go to that one public comment?
Oh, good.
If not, let's go ahead and bring that one public comment in on these three sections: timeline, meeting frequency, and reporting structure.
I just have a brief comment on the reporting structure. The task force shall report and provide all recommendations with a pro-con analysis. My experience in the past with providing a pro-con analysis to the city council was that city staff added their own added things to it. And when I was on the homeless task force, and the city council ended up choosing something that was not decided by the task force, but was decided by city staff. So I just wanted to make sure that if the task force creates a pro-con analysis, that the city staff is not able to add anything else to that, but it would be coming directly from the task force and only the task force. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that comment. I don't see anyone else wanting to comment on these three sections, so we'll bring it back to the panel here. Panel, do you have a comments about the public comment?
Well, I'll just say that I think, well, I do agree with what Julie's saying. I think there is always space for staff to make a recommendation that is clearly a staff recommendation. It's not that they're changing the recommendation, but simply they have another point of view. And I think that's fine for council to hear all points of view. So I think as long as it's clearly defined, that's fine.
Well, that's what I was going to say, that what I've seen done in the past is that if the staff wants to make recommendations, I agree that they should, but it could be delineated that if a particular section is a staff recommendation, that can be called out in parentheses that this comes from staff. I think that would be a good way to go. Anyone else?
It
should not be part of the recommendations.
If you're agreeing on what's going to be recommended at a certain point.
Okay, I hear some background talking, but I think that's not a comment. Okay, I'll take that as consensus that we'll just direct staff to make sure that they call out staff versus task force recommendations if they do differ.
I think that's standard procedure. I don't think we need to call it out, but whatever.
I think it doesn't hurt. So if that's all, we can, in the interest of time, move on. And I think what we can do maybe is take the next two sections, the composition and appointment process together. Those seem to be fairly meaty, and we might have some comments on those. Panel, I'll start with the panel. Any comments on those sections? Vice Mayor. Oh, sorry. Whoever's first.
Please go ahead.
Mr. Downs.
Okay, I just have one question on the 18, it says composed of 18 appointed by City Council, and then it says in addition. And so I just want clarification of then we're imagining that the total number from this would be 20, 18 council, and then if I'm reading the sentence right, as written now, in addition, includes a mayor or mayor's designee and a selection of SEJC. So I just want to make sure that I understand as written now that that's in addition to the 18, not inclusive of the 18.
You want me to clarify, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
So in drafting this section, pull it out of my binder here. In drafting this section, the goal was to provide the City Council with a bit of flexibility with adding members. So it doesn't necessarily mean, we say approximately 18 for a reason. So because the goal here is to have a diverse representation of people. And when we start to close in and say, okay, we're going to have exactly this number, you run the risk of leaving an important segment of the community whose voice needs to be heard out. And so I imagine there's going to be a lot of comment around this because the composition is very critical, but the goal here is to have a diverse representation of people. And so we didn't want to get bogged down with exactly how many number, because it could end up being 18. Well, we don't want to have 50 people in there because that's now not a manageable number, but you want to have a solid representation of the community as well as the impacted staff, which is the police department in this case. So, and notice that we haven't mentioned the police department in these numbers. So just consider that as you start to think through the number, but not, we didn't want to get bogged down with the number of people.
Thank you for that. Any other comments about the numbers? Vice Mayor, yes.
Not about numbers, I'm sorry.
Or anything else? Go ahead. Or go ahead, Vice Mayor, and why don't you say your comment?
Okay, on the composition, the fourth bullet point, I think the word faction, to me, that's a very divisive word, and I think that we're trying to have a community dialogue, not sections of our community dialoguing at each other. So I would take the word faction out, and it's several other places in the document, and replace it perhaps with segment or sections, something that is a little less, to me, adversarial. I don't have a really strong opinion on what that word is, but I think that makes sense. And then it says, in the event that we will have to cap attendees, I think attendee is the wrong word. I think the word is committee members, because the attendees are just the public that are, in my mind, are the public that attend the meeting. There can be as many of those as we can fit, either physically or via Zoom. So I think that word should be in the event that we have to cap the committee members.
Yeah, I'm guessing that was the intention there. It might just be a typo.
And there, like I said, the factions is in the appointment process and also in the introductory letter.
I'll I'll just jump in, and I see. I think the word faction can have negative connotations. So whatever word might be better, I'm okay with as well, unless anyone wants to thinks that factions or maybe if anyone thinks that factions is more appropriate, or there's a reason for use of that word, do let us know.
Do you want me to?
There was any, oh, I'm sorry. I don't think there, in our drafting, there was no segments, sections, whatever word does work is fine. There was nothing
Okay.
behind it.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think either of
Sounds like
those
we have an
social
agreement.
groups, anything like that. I agree with the vice mayor that it's better that we can find a better word.
Okay, so we can just direct staff to change it to something before it goes to council. So I think it looks like there's consensus on that. So it looks like, Vice Mayor, you had another comment?
On the 5th bullet point, where it says, again, it says preference will be given to those who have not been directly involved with the city. I would change that to we are seeking interest from those who have not previously been directly involved with the city. I would hate to lose a good person because they thought, oh, 3 years ago I was on X committee, or I've been on a committee, or I'm really interested in this and I don't feel like I've been heard, but I've participated, so I'm not welcome. I would rather see it a little more broad. We're seeking interest.
Yeah. Or I think this is I agree with that, and think we could say we're especially seeking applications from, or something. If you just add the modifier especially, it implies that you are also seeking other applications. But I agree with the vice mayor. I wouldn't want someone not to apply because of a sentence as it had been previously written.
And
agreed as well.
My final comment on this whole section is nowhere does it mention women. And I would like to see that somewhere we encourage women to participate.
Any objections to any of that?
Any objection to asking women to participate?
Oh, I think Janelle, you've got your hand up.
I do. Let me make sure. Oh, okay, I'm out for a minute. Does that sentence have to be in there? This is on bullet 4, to encourage participants of our youth and other historically disenfranchised persons and bring new voices into this important work, and just end it there. I mean, I guess, does that have to be there? Like, I understand where we're going with it, but I think as we look at the applications and start reviewing things, we know what we're looking for instead of spelling it out. I don't know. That's just my thoughts on that. And I also agree with Vice Mayor about putting something in here that we're seeking women as well.
So Janelle, are you suggesting we take out that whole section on those not previously involved?
Yeah, because
Yeah,
I mean, that could be kind of like, well, why are they I don't know. I don't want to give too much room for that. But I think if we just cut that sentence off and just leave it into this important work period, and then as we get into, looking at the applicants, then we can determine, they've been on, or whatever we want to.
I would support that.
So
Okay.
if I could suggest,
go ahead.
if I could suggest, so to encourage the participation of our youth, women, and other historically disenfranchised persons and bring new voices into this work, period.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ann.
Well, that's not a sentence, but staff could work on that piece.
Yeah. we can leave grammar till later. Yeah. Great. Other comments on composition and appointment process?
This comes up later, but I just want to say that on the bullet point above that, where it talks about people who have agreed to represent and facilitate communication. I'm not sure what that means. I don't think we ever really resolved who are people representing other people, or are they representing themselves? I'm not sure we've ever really clarified that piece.
Staff or consultants want to weigh in?
So the purpose of this part was to begin to look at how we can have representation. And that is a very, very tricky concept, no matter what the community. And so if it's very difficult because people obviously are individuals, and you have the issue of, I don't want anyone to represent me, but at the same time, we have to have certain voices at the table. So as you look through the application, you'll see the actual or whatever we're called, interest survey. There are spaces there where if you represent, I'm just going to throw out a group like the Kiwanis group, or you represent the pastors group or something like that. We have had folks that have been on committees, and then they come back and forth to their group representing the voices and bringing back and forth the information. That's one way that you can reach your tentacles out into the community, by having a representative. So if someone is going to represent, typically what folks have done is, if you're representing an organization, you've either been nominated or elected or some kind of process, then we recognize that as they're going through that, okay, this person is representing this group. And that then is considered as you do the work, because then you're going to do work in such a way that you're going to allow for that communication to go back and forth, knowing that you're reaching larger portions of the community. It really is a decision that as a community you have to make, and it's a very touchy one that you'll have to work through.
And just kind of to add to it, I can see where the group struggles with that. And one, way to address it is to look at it as you kind of hit that on the back end once you have the group established. And really, as Dr. Holt shared, that's something that the group understands is needed when you talk about communication and talking points to communicate the progress of the group. And so that may be something that has to be addressed with the process, is how you communicate out. And this would be a big one, is that these groups who are represented, how they will agree and commit to sharing with those particular stakeholder groups in the community that they represent. So that may be something on the back end that might be more helpful versus up front. And I don't know if, trying to tackle that now through the application process is a better use of time, or if it's about really once this group has been established. So that might be something to wrestle with. But her point is definitely something to consider.
When I looked at the app, you mentioned the application. When I looked at the application, I thought it did a good job of asking the sorts of questions about, do you feel like you're a member of this group? Do you feel like you're representing this group? It seemed to do a good job of teasing out all those subtleties. So I think that might be answered as we look at the applications. But I don't know if are you do you have a proposal, Vice Mayor, at this point, or?
No, I'm still kind of struggling with it, and I think I think if I were to apply as a woman, how am I representing all the women of Albany? I don't think so. How would I communicate? And I don't necessarily need an answer to this. And facilitate communication. Am I going to run around and talk to a bunch of women? I'm not quite sure how this works. So let's keep going, but let's keep in mind that part is still fuzzy, at least in my mind.
Okay.
But I'm happy to keep going on.
Okay. Final call for comments on appointment or composition. I guess I didn't bring up my point, which is that 18 is a pretty large number still. And that number originally came from a different selection process where we were going to pick from definite groups. Of course, the trade-off is the fewer people, the better, the less broad the representation. And then the more people, the maybe the less manageable it can be. But I'm fine with 18, but I just thought I would throw it out there. Do we want to say anything about that, or maybe just leave it to the council to have that discussion about whether the number 18 is appropriate? Oh, go ahead, Dr. Holt.
So a couple things. On the number, it really is up to you all and what's manageable. What I did want to comment on is that while this is a very robust list of people representing a lot of different areas, we do not have representation from the police department on here. And so that is something to consider as you look at the number of people. This is 18 people, just community members, and it's going to be challenging to have a task force on police without the police present. And so we just have to think about how and in what ways do we want police officers to begin to, or police representation, I shouldn't say officers, police representation in the committee, so that there is this has to be a sharing of ideas. It cannot be just the community saying this is what we want to see and this is what needs to happen, and et cetera. And it also is not a celebration or I'm looking for the right words, but it's not to pontificate about all the great things that the police department does. It's not to be adversarial. It really is to be a conversation. And in order to be a conversation and to decide collectively how you're going to move forward, you have to have all parties present. So I'm just thinking about how are we going to have this task force representative of both the community and the police department.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm happy to defer any discussion of the exact number till later. I don't think it's that important. The council could discuss that, but I do thank you for bringing up the police representation. I did make a note about that myself. I had some thoughts, and so I'll throw my thoughts out there to see what others think about it. My preference would be to have the chief available as at least as a staff member to answer questions. I think it would be important to have a person in leadership available to be able to address for the members of the task force to address questions to. And then the other thought I had is that we could potentially ask members of the police force, one or two, to if they're interested and willing to be part of the task force. So those are my two ideas around the representation of the police. Thoughts?
I'm sorry. I think I see Janelle's hand up.
Yeah. I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. Even to the point where even if there's a rotation of police staff members, that way that'll give them the opportunity to meet with the community members, understand a little bit more about the process and what we're trying to accomplish here. So even if we do it on a rotating base, I think that would also be, I think, well welcome and well received.
Okay. And again, just chime right in because I'm not able to always see everyone's virtual or real hand here.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with just encouraging people to apply. I'd also be fine with directing a inquiry directly to the Peace Officers Association. I think, you know, if you know, the chief mentioned that obviously it would depend on their interest and willingness, but you know, I think. You know, I'm okay with either inviting applications or with making a statement about a particular way of having a member.
Mayor, I'd be happy to chime in here to give some background to our typical role, the staff role with any advisory body. We're envisioning it would be similar. As you stated, Mayor, the police chief to participate, as well as a representative from the APOA, our Police Officers Association. Presumably the president of that association. That position rotates through the departments, so that helps respond to the interest in kind of a rotating seat as well. I do want to clarify, as the mayor stated, our intent, staff would be listening and answering questions. So they certainly wouldn't be, a voting member by any means to this group, more in a position of just serving as a liaison and a support role. It's also envisioned that we would have that administrative support for the group too, similar to how you see our other advisory bodies arranged.
Yeah, it seems like there's agreement that that a staff person from the police would be wanted and useful for the purpose of being the support and the answering the questions. I think where the tension comes in is that what I'm hearing is that if we don't hear from the members of the force, that then that doesn't feel right either. And so I'm struggling a little bit. I suppose the members of the police force can always participate as attendees of the meeting. But what I've heard from other members of this this working group, that they wanted something a little bit more formal than that. That's what I thought I heard, but I'll see if I got that right or not. Vice Chair Gary, did you have a comment on that, or still have your hand up there?
No, sorry about that. My hand was up. I apologize.
No worries.
Mayor, I'd like to ask our police chief to also give some input to this item, if that's helpful.
Sure. I just want to echo what Nicole has said and Dr. Shelley brought up. We want to participate in this and be respectful of the process, but there are going to be times where people need to understand police departments are different. Large police departments may operate one way. We're a smaller police department. And so there may be things they see other departments doing that just aren't realistic for us, or and then we can provide that expertise. If somebody has a question about, well, how does a body camera operate? We would be there as a resource for some advice, direction, and comments on it.
So perhaps, thank you for that. So perhaps at the very least, we could encourage participation of members of the force as attendees to the meeting. Perhaps we could add that to the language, or not. And again, another idea I'll throw out there to the members of this working group. See if that makes any sense.
So this is Nicole. I'll offer this. I think the idea of police representation and not putting that in a box in terms of who that is not a bad idea. But keep in mind that the role of the task force is to do research and look at data, and they do need police to help provide some of that context, as Chief Geisberger said. So I think that you want to not put yourself in a box in terms of who that would be, because each of those meetings may differ. So depending on where the task force is in their process, and they probably will have subcommittees, and that data conversation may look different one day than another day. So you want to be able to have some openness on, there will be some special guests that need to come to these task force meetings to provide some kind of context for the group. So I think it might be helpful to leave it kind of broad, but definitely commit to having police representation, because I think if you don't have that, I think it said earlier, you kind of miss, the purpose of all of this and collaborating and trying to move towards community policing. And so I think that definitely is an idea to think about. And you don't have to do that tonight. I think you just, be very clear that during the process, there will be times that you have staff liaisons, possibly community partners, police officers. There's going to be additional people need to come to the table to be able to provide context for that work group. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Okay, thank you for that. So it sounds like we are, the staff is definitely committing to having police staff there to answer questions, et cetera. Perhaps we don't need to go beyond that at this point. And I'm not hearing necessarily a consensus on any additions to this language at this point. I'm seeing at least one head nod. So maybe we can mull that over a little bit. And we do have a couple of attendee comments. So let's get to those real quick in the interest of time. So if when you're ready, City Clerk, if you could invite those comments in.
Go ahead,
Commenters.
Julie.
Hi, thanks. So I do have a few comments about this section. I wanted to start out by the police officer, since that was brought up. I think that, and maybe this is what Nicole and Shelley were saying, but I think that just asking the task force to just make that decision. Do they want to invite the police for a meeting? I think that assuming that the police are going to be there is not really letting the task force be in charge of what they're doing. And since they're going to represent a real range of diversity from the city, I think it should always be their prerogative to not have the police officers there for some of the meetings. And then on bullet 2, representative members, I would recommend saying that not limited to members from such groups as those that experienced racial oppression, incarceration, as well as Albany youth, Albany seniors, etc. And then I question the use of the word marginalized. Always makes me wonder whose margins you're talking about. So I would encourage you to try to find another word, or to say groups that are on the margins of the dominant society, since that's what you're talking about. But that's a long phrase. But the word marginalized doesn't really mean anything, because we're all marginalized in some way. And then bullet 4, goals to accommodate approximately 18 people representing, I would say representing the diversity of our community, rather than representing various factions. That whole discussion, I would just say representing the diversity of our community. In the event that we will have to cap attendees, we will be prioritizing the voices of LGBTQ plus community, Black community, people with disabilities, Indigenous, other people of color. And then instead of representing, I agree with Peggy, and I think it should just say who will help express the sentiments of our entire community. And then appointment process. I know I brought this up last time, and I know this is probably not the direction you're going to go, but I would really encourage you to have the task force be the group that reviews the application. This group, your group that is meeting today, be the ones that review the applications, and then the city council approves it, rather than the city council reviewing the applications. I think that this group is better situated to do that you've been doing all the work, that you know what you want, and that you also represent a larger diversity than the city council. So I would really, really, really encourage you to do that. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Julie, before you go, I didn't quite capture your first suggestion. Could you state that real quickly again?
Sure. The city council shall aim to ensure appointees to the task force. This is the one not about the police officers, right? The one, this is the bullet?
Right.
Okay. The city council shall aim to ensure appointees to the task force represent a diverse perspective of the Albany community, including but not limited to members from groups from groups that have experienced racial oppression, incarceration, as well as Albany youth, Albany seniors, Albany business community, local service organizations, etc. And then when I got to marginalized, I just questioned the use of word marginalized. Maybe you don't even need it. Just say that historically underrepresented and the Albany Unified School District. Just don't use the word marginalized is my recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that. Next speaker, please.
Okay, hi, Corey Dosty. You hear me this time too? Great.
Yes.
I have 5 points. Let's go. Number 1, I believe from checking the Oakland's Reimagining Public Safety Task Force document, they don't have police representation pulled out per se. What they have is people with law enforcement operation and budget knowledge as a criterion that's considered when selecting the people appointed to the task force, which would be an interesting thing to have on your survey. I don't know if you want that. I agree about the police attending and advising and being involved generally. I do think that Julie's suggestion is a good one about sometimes the task force might want to have the discretion to have it be not involving a police officer. Second point is that clarity when applying, I think, needs to be important. So this maybe does need to be figured out ahead of time if you're going to mandate that there is a police presence. If it's not the task force's decision, because I think that will affect who applies. There's a possible intimidation factor. I don't know if I want to work on a task force where there's, I don't know if it's going to be voting members or all of that stuff, but what level of contact with police and police union members and the police community is going to be involved? That's like an energy factor, a comfort factor of the people applying. So that needs to be clear in the survey. Point 3, representing and communication. This one's hard to explain. So I think I understand what the consultants are saying about representing a demographic or constituency. My question would be, is that about having an active group, active connections to go back to, which seems like what you're talking about, versus do you have past experience of working with a bunch of people of this identity that you also have, preferably, because that works better than, oh, I've worked with the homeless. But you know, if you've been involved in your community, but maybe you aren't right now, how does that get reflected on the survey? Because you probably want to differentiate that and weigh that differently, but not rule out past experience, even if someone has moved and is no longer connected where they were before. I'll go with the quick. The appointment process with Julie, I do agree it would be best for the working group. I understand that might not be possible, but certainly the consultants, and I don't see them in here. It should be City Council plus the consultants, right? Reviewing, at least advising the review of the applications. And then just in terms of pulling women out of historically disenfranchised groups, I have a bunch of comments about women and femmes and non-binary people, people other than men, marginalized genders. There's different ways to spin that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. One more.
Go ahead, Bart.
Hi, task force members. I just wanted to weigh in briefly on this question about police participation. I understand concerns about intimidation, but on the other hand, if the goal here is to enhance communication between the community and the police, I don't know how you do that if the police are not involved in the conversation. And I think what we've seen repeatedly and historically in terms of police reform is that groups develop a plan for the police, and then it turns out either it's not really feasible because there was a lack of information about what the constraints were, or you don't get police buy-in. And when you don't get police buy-in, we've seen nationally that you can train and you can make policies and you can, make changes till you're blue in the face, but it doesn't happen because you don't have the buy-in of the people who have to represent those policies. And I think that's key. And I think it's very dangerous to set one group up to make policy for another group and not give that group a voice in the conversation. I would hope that that the task force would have enough support and enough weight within the city that intimidation would not be an issue. But I do think representation is very important for the police to feel like the outcome here is something that they can support. So that's my comment on that.
Thank you very much. And that's the last public speaker, so I'll bring it back to the working group. I think maybe we're not going to fully be able to address the question of police involvement tonight. What I did hear is some interest in perhaps letting the task force choose when the police participation would be appropriate or not. We could leave it to the to the task force. We could leave it to the council. We could just move on. I'm a little worried that we don't have consensus on this one right now. So I'll throw it back to the other members of this group for comments. I see that the vice mayor's got her hand up.
I'm not sure why you think we don't have consensus, as this group hasn't really discussed it. I think the police have to be there. I think, Bart, you did a great job explaining several reasons why to have good communication, all the people need to be at the table. And I see absolutely no reason not to have them there. I think, I think Nicole Anderson, I think you're the one, but both of you have made it very clear that they're part of the process. We can't exclude them. So I think to me, it's just a given. So I think we should, if we have consensus, and I see people nodding their heads, that we should be done with this part of the conversation, that yes, they're not a member, they don't vote, but they need to be in the room and at the table.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I may perhaps I misrepresented or didn't quite understand, but I just did want to honor the idea that that there might be. No, I'll just leave it there. So are you saying that we should include something then in the language? I wasn't clear about that.
I would defer that to the consultants to get the best language. I've heard a couple of things I thought was appropriate, but I think they have a better handle on this.
Okay.
And so just to clarify part, I'm sorry, because I know we talked a couple of, so are we talking about the first bullet again?
I think so. Yes, I'd forgotten about that. Yes.
Okay, so just needing clarity on the best language for that piece?
Or I think maybe that was added, the police representation was added during this meeting. So if we're good with that, or if we need small tweaks, then maybe we can just move on.
Yeah.
I guess because they're staff, I kind of wonder why it's here at all. It may fit better someplace else, just in the documents, sort of as how this works. The police will serve as liaisons or staff or someplace else in the document. But I think Nicole, both of you, and Dr. Shelley can maybe fit that in somewhere.
Yeah, so one of the things to consider with task force is that, again, as it mentioned, you're going to need police to be a part of this process. It's really your decision on how involved you want them. And I do agree that the task force helps support like where the need is. But at the end of the day, the staff liaison role, you have to, so in this document, we need to establish roles. So I do want to say that, like, there's a staff liaison role, there's a facilitator role, there's a role of the task force, there's a role of the subcommittees, there's a role of the city council. You have to establish roles, and I think that's where you can flesh out those details of what the police role is. I think that's important. And I don't know if you put this in the composition, except to acknowledge that police representation, would be, I think it's okay to call it out, but definitely the details would show up in the roles. And that way there's clarity so people understand what that means.
Perfect.
Does that help? And that way you don't put them in a box. So even saying the chief and APOA president, like, I don't even know if you want to go that deep. I think you just want to say police representation, leave it nice and simple. And then in the roles, you can clearly put what that may mean. And also city staff obviously plays a role, but maybe the words, staff liaison might just encompass all of them. But I do think you should call out police representation so people understand that there is that kind of presence to weigh in. If you don't put it there, it leaves it open for people to be confused. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay.
I like the last thing you said. If we just mention, and we don't have to wordsmith it here, but police representation somehow, very generally, that seems like we might have consensus on that. shout out. If not, if you have an objection. Otherwise, we'll leave it. We'll leave the wordsmithing to staff and the consultants, and we'll move on. There were some other comments about some other terminology or phrasing, rather, in this part of the document by some of the public comment. Is there anything we wanted to incorporate from that?
I think for the sake of time, I think the public comments, notating those, and then we take all of that information to inform the revision of this is probably appropriate versus trying to get all the wordsmithing done now. I think that's going to be a tougher task. But I know we've been notating the public comments, and also, again, communication has been, given to us from public as well. So I think we have it. And I know Nicole, City Nicole, has her notes she's taken as well. So I think it'll be fair to say, once the meeting is over, we can revise this, and then it'll reflect in the next meeting.
Thank you for that.
Whatever that looks like.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay, yeah, I think looks like we're good to move on then. So moving on, unless there's objection.
Wait, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Appointment process was part of what we just did. Is that correct?
Yes.
We did have public comment that the council should not be the appointing body, but rather this group. I believe it should be the council. It's a council subcommittee, it's an advisory body to the council. I think they should be the appointing body. So I think we need to determine that before we move too much further.
Yeah, my impression was that we had made a decision about that at the previous meeting, and that that was our decision. Or it might not have been a consensus, but I think that was the majority decision.
Okay,
that's the council. Okay. All right. Unless I've gotten that wrong or there's an objection, let's go ahead and move on. And I believe the final piece is the survey. And I'll just say that I appreciate the work on this survey. I liked it a lot. I think it's, to get too deep into the survey might be problematic. I thought to myself at first, is it a bit too long? But I thought it also it allows the ability to have a lot of expression, a self-expression about who this person is who's applying. So they can certainly, if they can't answer a section, they can leave it blank. They won't be penalized for that. So I'm personally good with it as it is. So I will throw it open to other panelists at this point, other working group members at this point.
I've got comments,
Vice Mayor.
but I'm happy to defer. I've talked a lot, so if somebody else wants to go first. Okay, here I go. I think we touched briefly last time on the idea that people should know that their answers will be part of the public record, and that should, I think, be clearly stated on here.
That's a good point.
As far as the diversity indicators, oops, going the wrong way. I think as often as we can do open-ended responses, I think that's really good. Okay, and then number 22. And I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. What segments of the community are you willing to represent and communicate with on behalf of the task force? I'm not sure people would know how to answer that. I'm not sure what we're asking them to do. If we could somehow clarify that. And if I'm supposed to...
Did you want to respond to Vice Mayor Peggy, or did you want me to respond, Dr. Shelley? Because I think it's the same question earlier. You're right, it kind of shows up twice. So
right, and it's And I think here, if they're thinking they have to answer, I don't know how you exactly answer that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, Dr. Shelley, I'll jump in unless you want to, but I think it kind of goes back to the same piece, is really trying to help people, I don't want to say make a commitment, but really identify that they can be the carriers of the message back to the community they're representing. And so maybe there's another way to ask that, or maybe it doesn't show up here. Maybe it shows up when the task force, comes together, and then that can be clarified to that group, because it is an important component to, like, why do we have representation if the representation doesn't become a connector back to the community on the work, and that they understand that they represent that stakeholder group, but they also don't represent that whole stakeholder group. They represent their individuality. And so we don't want them to misrepresent on behalf of all when they didn't get that feedback. So it's kind of like this commitment piece, and maybe it's worded, maybe it needs to be worded differently, but there is some level of connection back to the community that people need to understand, that this is a commitment and kind of an obligation you're signing up for, that this role is not taken lightly, that you can't keep all the information to yourself and then come back and say, like, you're the only representation, and that's what we should take into consideration. So I hope that helps a little bit. But I do understand where you maybe there's an explanation behind that, so people know how to answer that question, or we just possibly leave it alone and then help educate the task force once they come on board to help them understand what that means. And that could come through the process in an actual agenda. As you close out meetings, you talk about what are our key talking points that we want to go back and share to particular stakeholder groups. It could be we just do that after they've already been on. And that might help eliminate some of the confusion for that question altogether.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I guess, okay, never mind. Okay, and then number 24, have you had any personal past experiences with the Albany Police Department? I'd like to see the phrase positive or negative after experiences. And then 25, have you witnessed or been the survivor of a crime where the Albany Police Department was involved? To me, that sounds like they were the criminals. And so I think it makes more sense to say, to use the word either responded, had jurisdiction, or assisted another agency. Number 26, have you heard about the experiences of others with the Albany Police Department? I know, I think we've talked about this before, but to me, that's really a hearsay question. I've heard this or I've heard that. I'm not sure that needs to be on the application. It seems like a better place for that is in a discussion at the task force. If somebody has a concern and they've heard whatever, it's a better face-to-face discussion, I think, rather than something that goes on an application. And then availability, is that on here? Yeah. What are the times you're available to support this work? I'm not sure that sentence is exactly what we're looking for. I think
do this work?
Well, to support this work, 24 hours a day is how you support this work, really. So, I mean, we're giving them 7 days a week, and what times are you available? There's only certain times that reasonably people are going to be able to meet. So I think if we make it too open-ended, we're going to have 18 different answers, and how are we ever going to come up with the best time? So I'm not quite sure how to make that work, so we end up with a time people are really available.
And this is one of those questions I don't think we should put too much weight on. I think what happens is you want to get a sense of people's availability so you can start to plan your calendar. But once the group comes together, typically after meeting number 1, you really get to kind of nail that down with the group. And so I wouldn't worry too much about it, but it is good preliminary data to have, because again, it could vary. We could assume we know that, but we may be wrong. So I think that's something that want to have kind of, it might be general, you might get 1,000 different answers, but the reality is that you want to get a sense, because there may be some trends to help you kind of be proactive in how you're going to plan these meetings, considering you have other meetings on your city calendars that are going to cross over. So you want to have some form of planning,
Right.
trying to get it. So your point makes sense, but I think you don't want to worry too much about that until that first meeting when you get to talk to the actual task force.
Well, but I think there's two things there. One is there are times that, because we need to also look at the staff availability, especially if we're doing Zoom.
Mhm.
And so it's, it's not, there are sometimes it may just not work. And we don't want a task force to come together and then find out that 2/3 of them can meet and the 1/3 of them can't. And so then they kind of drop off. But I agree, something to be worked out later.
Yep.
Yeah. So those are my thoughts on that piece.
Yeah. Which I think is important, that you have a question like this to help people understand there's a commitment to this. So once you sign up, this is the expectation. And I think it's okay to put something like this on here so they do think about this is a commitment. So maybe what needs to go into that place is some kind of sentence to preface the fact that there will be monthly meetings, possibly by week. I don't know. You place something there to give them a sense of there's a commitment to this work. So please help us. We plan. Please help us understand your availability.
Right. I think that's good. And I think maybe even we're looking at a 6-month commitment.
Right. Yeah.
Subcommittees working extra.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's said further up, but I think that could be repeated there.
Yep. Good point.
Okay, that's all I have on that section.
Okay.
Okay, are there any objections to the suggestions by the Vice Mayor?
I wouldn't say an objection, but just a clarification that the questions regarding experiences are to balance the group. If you get a group, because you did not ask about their experiences with the police, who all have had negative experiences with the police, that's a setup. If you get a group that all have positive experiences with the police, that's a setup. And so you want a group that has a diversity of experiences. The only way to do that is to ask about their experiences. And they're open-ended on purpose, just to allow people to freely express what their experiences have been. And then as a council, you will decide, how do we balance out the experiences of the community members in this group? Because when it comes to policing, you have people that have you have people that have possibly committed crimes. You have people that have been victims of crimes. You have witnesses of crimes. You have people that have been traumatized as family members. There's a large gamut of experiences, from, a traffic stop to a large scale investigation, and everything in between. And so we want to know, and if the group has better, because your community, if there's better ways to ask the questions so that they land better with the Albany community, absolutely. But the purpose of that is to ensure you have a diversity of experiences, positive and possibly negative.
Well, that was kind of why I wanted to put both words in there, so somebody wouldn't read it and think, oh, they only want positive, or they only want negative. Putting it in there, it's very clear we want both.
It makes it clear. Clarity is kindness. I agree with you on that one completely. That's why I said it's not a rebuttal, but just to understand that was the purpose of this section. And then the council will have the responsibility, or whomever is deciding, to look at this and say, all right, we have, 5 people that have had very, very negative. We have, 10 people that have had great positive. We have some in the middle. We got a good, array. We're good to go.
Yeah, maybe objection is not the right word, but any other comments on the Vice Mayor's suggestions?
Could you just remind us of, on 26, what was, Vice Mayor, if you had I was able to capture your wariness of the question as asked, but if you suggested a specific rewording, I'm sure you did, but I can't keep it clear in my mind about the experiences.
I really didn't have a specific alternative. I don't really like that question. I think you're asking people about hearsay That's difficult. I mean, I think, what was your experience? Did you have a bad experience? You know, did you have a good experience? Not when you start asking people, well, what have you heard? To me, that kind of takes away the, we're trying to be really transparent. We're trying to be inclusive in every way. And then it sort of moves it into a different realm rather than personal experiences.
So I wonder if the challenge is the word heard, and yet we also want to, think about Dr. Holt's, sense that we do want to, make sure that we have a sense of people's broad responses. What if we said, what's your general impression of the Albany Police Department? That takes some of the onus off the word heard or the hearsay or sort of rumor question, but does give people a space to step away from their own direct personal experience.
Greg, great minds think alike, because that's what I raised my hand for, to say that. I think that would work better than saying, what have you heard? Again, like Vice Mayor said, that's just hearsay. But, tell me about your perception, or tell me how you feel. Just get, in the emotions of what their perception of the police department is and how they feel about the police department after you ask those questions. So I would recommend or suggest, that we change that number 26 to implying more of their perception.
I can support that.
Yeah, that's asking that person their thoughts. I think that's a better way to do that.
Yeah, and I want to add one reminder about the purpose of this part of the survey, because I know it is the part that kind of stresses people out a little bit, and needing a lot of understanding of how to ask the questions accurately so you get the most accurate, deep data. But I do want to remind you, beyond the task force, that this is an application, and you could have 100 applicants, for example. And this application, obviously, you'll look at and you only pick, 18 to 20 people. And so you still have a sample size of data of experiences that will help drive your work beyond just, let's put them on the task force. So I think it is important to have these type of questions, which actually can show up in future community surveys, to continue to collect data ongoingly that will inform your work throughout the time you're together in trying to address the community policing vision that you have. So I just want to remind you too, in terms of recognizing the struggle you may have with these questions, but also understanding the purpose of them and that they go beyond this task force. And so I think you can utilize this to support your work.
Okay, seems like we had an agreement on rewording of that. We do, by the way, do we have a, I surely don't want to drag this out too much, but do we have a hard stop at 6, or if we have to go beyond 6 p.m., are we able to do that?
Close to 6.
Yeah, we'll certainly try to keep it within the time frame. I was just trying to make sure that if we had several members who had to leave at 6, we noted that. But let's try to move forward.
Mayor, the city clerk just reminded me that we have Park Rec open space starting at 7, so they will need setup time for that, as it's the same staff to host all of the meetings.
Thank you for that. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead. So final call for comments on the Vice Mayor's suggestions. I have, aside from the one that we talked about where we came to agreement, I don't have an issue with those suggestions. So if there's no objection, I'll move to back to public comment, final public comment on the on this section in the document. So City Clerk, when you're ready, if you could let the commenters in.
Go ahead, Corey.
There we go. And testing and recognition.
Yeah.
Yes, great. Okay. just going in numerical order. Number 2, because thank you for pointing out that this is public record. That's very important to know. If someone wants to use a PO box, I have a PO box in Oakland, but I do live in Albany. I have at this point made my Albany address. It's in public comments. Someone could go hunt it down, but I'm wondering if it has to be in Albany to be considered or if it would be outright rejected, right? That's maybe something to think about on the application. I'm going to skip number 16 with housing. Unhoused should be an option. It's pretty simple. Number 22, I think this is again that clarity around, are you looking for someone who's currently connected to and communicating with those groups? Are you looking for someone who's willing to stand up and do that? Are they going to get help to connect with those groups, right? All of that stuff. And maybe that's something that is talked about later. Yeah, I think that is a point of clarity. And then jumping back to number 8, the disability question. I like this format. I would maybe add neurodiversity, just because some folks who are neurodiverse don't consider it a disability, like autistic pride. Some of us don't consider ourselves disabled. I could talk about that, but it's not a huge deal. The main point about number 8 and disability is there's a big spectrum of how much it affects you. And that can be really important. If it's someone who has mild seasonal affective depression versus somebody who has cerebral palsy, and not forcing them to disclose is great. I think one way to sort of measure that is there are questions that exist. I don't have them on reference right now and I do have to go. But things like, how drastically does your disability affect your day-to-day activities? How drastically does it interfere with your day-to-day activities? And that could be an important measure there, just to make sure that if you think you've got like a whole bunch of great disabled representation and then it turns out, oh, it's all people who haven't experienced severe mental illness, which is something that we want represented, but that's hard to disclose, but could be disclosed through this drastically affects my life kind of thing, right? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, so starting with demographics, email address, I think you should add if available. Not everybody has an email address. For the diversity indicators, I think the select all that apply should be on every single one of them if there's any choice at all. Just make that clear. Maybe that's what you were going to do and prefer not to state, looks like it's for every single one, but just to make sure that you can select all that apply. I appreciate the blank line after gender identity and expression and after sexual orientation. I agree with Corey about the neurodiversity as well as how does it impact. I don't think people should have to disclose any, especially if this is a public document, anything they don't want to disclose about themselves. I would leave that open-ended and not have check boxes. For race, just make sure that you don't use, I would encourage you to use a line for race also and not have census options because the census options are limited. And whatever you do, don't include the word other. However, if you do, you end up using census options, just maybe prefer to self-identify and don't ever use the word other. I would ethnicity and culture again, all, that's number 10, all open-ended. 11, I would do the same thing, all open-ended. Socioeconomic status, I would take out the word homeless. For example, a person that's a survivor of domestic abuse isn't necessarily, that's not their socioeconomic status, that's their housing status. So I would just take homeless out. And I would encourage you to use the options by amount. There's a question mark in there, you know, under 20,000, under 40,000, whatever, one of those lists. Housing status, I agree with Corey. I was going to say the same thing. Unhoused, and I would also put living and vehicle. And then for the other question I just have is, how am I doing it? Oh, fine. Okay. Role in the community. I think that that's a really confusing question. Role in the community, business, youth, student, faith-based. That's not really your role. I think there you maybe need to find another word for that. I was trying to think of another word, maybe either just take out that whole question And then where it says self-identity, number 14, description, you could have it open-ended and a text box and say, for example, part of the business community, a student, a parent. And also, I don't think you should use the word resident. I would, if you're going to somehow have that list, I would use community member, because there's sort of a question there about because of our the immigration issues in our country, the negative attitudes. I wouldn't use the word resident ever, and I would just use community member. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Vehicle. Yeah, or you could say, what groups do you identify with, would be another way that, but I just don't think role in the community really covers it. And I'm really glad that you're going to put in this as part of the public record. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's the last public speaker. Thank you for your comments. Do we have particular comments about the public comment, or should we leave it to staff and consultants to incorporate suggestions? I think I would only comment perhaps on one of the public comments. Otherwise, I'd leave it to staff or consultants to incorporate. But anyone on the panel?
Yeah, I have a quick comment and maybe a question. So two things you said. So yes, I think we're fine with taking all the feedback and revising the document. I don't think that's a problem, and all legit things to consider. But the piece about the it becoming public, and so I don't know, Nicole, I think that you have like an attorney that kind of determines that piece, and I just share a concern about what is public and what isn't in terms of confidential information. I mean, I understand what public record is, but I also just want to be mindful of people's safety, and that in itself could be a determinant of getting representation that we'd like to have. So can you clarify, just kind of from the legal standpoint, how much of that document has to be public, or does all of it, and how we may need to put language in there to be very clear about what that looks like?
Yeah, I did send it to our city attorney to review. There is some information we can redact directly, which is straightforward. Other information will need to be interpreted a bit further by the city attorney in terms of what can be redacted. Okay. However, I do want to note that as the council is going through the selection process, if the council is doing that at an open public meeting, which they will be, and reviewing the applications, some component of the information will be part of that record. So we'll definitely work through that with our city attorney. Absolutely understood the sensitivity of the information and those applying. So we'll make sure to shore that up.
Okay. Yeah. And so to follow up on that, my only recommendation, if it's, legally on your end aligned, is maybe the demographics section is the piece that is redacted. Because I don't even know if that information is necessary outside of the fact that, the council and those who are going to eyeball these applications may know a person by name. So maybe that's something to consider, that becomes public based on the name. But even that kind of opens it up. And I'm concerned because some of the other questions then create some level of maybe concern. And everything is about safety, because going back to experiences, there are some people really want to be involved in the process, but they are still concerned about experiences. And let's just say I had a bad experience. I put in an application, I don't get selected, but my information is kind of out there and I'm not sure how this looks. So I think just clear communication to them about what this means in the long run, just being very explicit about that is something to consider is all. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Take that into consideration. Other comments? Vice Chair Gary.
Hi, and first of all, I want to apologize. I wanted to go back up. If you can scroll back up, and I wanted just to make a quick suggestion. To keep going. Right here, the appointment process. And I know we spoke about it last meeting, but I just want you, Mr. Mayor and Vice Mayor, to really take in consideration, if we do have the city council, it would be great if myself or Chair Downs, as well as the consultants or even some representative from SCJC could be a part of the process, the selection process. I'm just concerned that, that we know what we want to see. We know what the community would like to see. And so I would just ask that you would take in consideration to include us as well in the selection process, or possibly the interviewing. Some way you can kind of, throw ideas back and forth. That way we make sure that we select the right individuals for this task force. So I apologize, I came in, but we're back on this again, but I wanted just to see if I can just throw it out again, if you would please consider that in the selection process. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm certainly open to that. I can commit at least to bringing that up as a request and a concern when this comes to council, that was the request, and that's the desire, that we have more than council input on that, and we can make a final decision at council.
I'll be quick because I know the time. I think it's a good idea to include. I certainly understand the utility of council being able to act clearly as the final decider, but I think that Commissioner Gary's suggestion of making sure to indicate the desire for input is also a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems, if there's no other comments about the survey, the final decision might be whether or not we should have another meeting of this working group. I'm inclined to think that we're at a point where we could refer this to council, and if there's agreement on that, then there will be another chance for input at council. Final input, and I also would recommend to council that they take the input of this working group, that they give deference to the input of this working group at council as well, knowing how much we've worked on this. So, but I am of the opinion that this could be our final meeting, and we could depend on staff and the consultants to make a final draft for the council and then bring this to council. Comments?
One thing I
Vice
think
Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chair Downs.
The one thing I think we could quickly do is just simplify the title. I mean, I do think that we could just call it the, rather than, the policing task force, or, making sure I've got, right now it's community policing and public relations task force. I think just call it policing task force. Eliminate some of the concerns by the public that, and just make it simple and clear.
I'm okay with that. Vice Mayor, you had a comment? Different comment, probably.
I have a different comment. Let me think about this idea, though. So I'm sorry, Chair Downs, it would just simply be policing task force?
That's my suggestion. I'm not wedded to that if there are other suggestions, but rather than given some of the apprehension or potential for misunderstanding raised by community voices, if we want something just clear, policing task force.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Oh, okay. I'll just say that I am uncomfortable with the public relations part. That can be seen as, PR firms do have are often called upon to put a spin on things, or, to put it, too strongly whitewash things. So I'm a little bit worried. I'm a little bit concerned about having the public relations in there. I would like a better term. I would prefer a better term, or prefer to have that removed myself.
Mayor, if I may, a working title that came to mind was Community Task Force on Policing. That way it clarifies that, the focus is with the community on making recommendations on changes to policing. Just an option to throw out there for the group.
Yeah, I like that one better, because I think it's important to say community, so it's policing task force, who's there? So I like community task force on policing.
That I'm good with that.
But Gary, yeah,
Yes, community task force. Be great.
yeah. Four nods, 4 thumbs up on that one. Okay, great. Thank you, City Manager. Good call.
Yes, thank you.
So could I make a possibly final
Please.
comment? The very last thing on here is the letter that, the introduction letter. I think it's important for the entire council to sign the letter, and the city manager and the police chief, which is what is mentioned up above. And then when you get down to the bottom, it just says the work group. So I think the comments, I think, were made by the consultant perhaps about giving it more power, and that they've been part of the work, and I think that's an important piece. So I think that's how it should get signed.
Yeah. I thank you for mentioning that. I didn't quite know what that meant, that very last line there. So thanks for mentioning it. I forgot to bring it up before, but I'm good with your suggestion, Vice Mayor. Chair or Vice Chair, any comments on that? Or are you good with that?
I'm sorry, Vice Mayor, could you say it one more time?
The way I'm understanding this is sort of the cover letter to the survey, and it would be signed by the city council, the police chief, and the city manager.
So I guess my question, so where it says Albany City Council Work Group lists all names, were the consultants saying the people in this work group that's working on it, and you're saying just have it City Council Police? Is that what
I'm saying? Is at the beginning of that section in sort of salmony color is the it's a comment by somebody. I'm assuming it's maybe the consultants. Yeah, that part right there.
Okay.
And it says, very first sentence, I'm sorry, I started reading from the bottom. To be written from and signed by the city council members, mayor, police chief, and city manager. And it gives it a little more cachet, maybe, that, the city leadership is behind this. We've worked together on it. And we want everybody to participate, or we want everyone to consider participating. So I think the problem is there's that and what's on the bottom aren't the same. And I was supporting the idea on the top.
Or, I'm fine with adding the additional working group members too. Now I understand what that was. I'm fine with if the chair and vice chair SCJC want to add their names as well.
I think that would be good, because we are part of the working group, if the chair agrees as well.
Sure.
We could have additional working group members, or also members of the working group, or some wording. Vice Mayor, was that an agreement?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I'd be happier to include them. Great, good. Well, I guess it's time for our ultimate comments, our final comments, before we adjourn this meeting and therefore the working group. Any last words? I'm reminded that last words usually isn't a good way to say that. What would people like to say?
Excellent work. We all did an excellent job. I think we should leave it like that.
Yeah, well, I want to say thank you to everyone, certainly. And this has been a great process. And I think we've come up with a great product, and very happy and with the participation of everyone. And thank you again.
Well, since everybody's saying their goodbyes, I just want to say that, you know, I think we've done a great job. Everybody's worked hard, and I'm grateful to you all for doing that. I'm grateful for all of the public input that we received. And I think we just want to remember that the ultimate goal, and I believe it's everyone's ultimate goal, is that we end up with, or that we ensure that we have the best possible police department in Albany, both that supports our community and that feels supported by our community. And I think that's our ultimate goal. And I think as we go forward, that's what we want to keep our sort of our focus on.
Thank you for that.
I want to echo everyone's thanks and staff's thanks, and just echo that the next task for this group is an important one. And so I think we did a good job fulfilling our role, and in some ways the hard work still lies ahead, and that's what we'll be in the end measured by. So.
Okay. Looks like we're done. Thank you so much, everybody. Meeting is adjourned. See you at the City Council.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.